Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Sarah Cady, and I am the Executive Director of the Refugee and Immigrant Services Department at Lutheran Social Services of the National Capital Area, LSSNCA. Tonight, we will be discussing the current state of the Ukrainians arriving to the United States and the role you can play along with LSSNCA to welcome them. Our panel tonight is LSSNCA CEO, Kristyn Peck, and Chief Operating Officer, Mamadou. A quick announcement that you can drop questions into the question and answer box, and we will address them during the question and answer portion later in the night. Thank you again, and I'd like you to introduce our panelists tonight, and then we will get started. Kristyn Peck is the Chief Executive Officer of Lutheran Social Services of the National Capital Area, which was the 2022 recipient of Lutheran Services in America's MICA Award for its work advancing equity and justice. Prior to joining LSSNCA, Kristyn served as the founding CEO of West Michigan Partnership for Children, a nonprofit piloting an innovative performance-based child welfare model. There, she was named the Michigan Federation of Children and Families Advocate of the Year. Kristyn also served as the Associate Director of Children's Services at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, USCCB. She oversaw national family reunification and foster care programs for unaccompanied children. As chair of the Vulnerable Minors Working Group of Refugee Council USA, she testified before Congress on protection needs for unaccompanied children and represented USCCB as a subject matter expert on unaccompanied children at the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR's annual consultation meetings in Geneva. Dr. Mamadou has 17 years of experience at LSSNCA. Today, he serves as Chief Operating Officer. Dr. Tsai's focus on refugee and immigration services includes leading LSSNCA's Unaccompanied Refugee Minor Program, a federally funded program providing loving, secure foster homes to youth. Since joining LSSNCA in 2004, he has helped resettle more than 10,000 refugees in Virginia and Maryland. A graduate of Cheikh Anta Diop University in Dakar, Senegal, Dr. Tsai holds a PhD in Egyptology and is the author of several peer-reviewed articles. Dr. Tsai is a former member of the Maryland Governor's Commission on African Affairs and currently serves as a member of the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services Cultural and Linguistic Competency Advisory Committee.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the introduction, and thank you all of you for your time this evening. We know there are many ways you could be spending your Thursday night, and we're so honored that you're spending it with us. Together, we are creating the communities that we want to see. The U.S. has long been a global leader and as being a safe haven for those who are forcibly displaced from their homelands due to no fault of their own. The United States Refugee Admissions Program enjoyed strong bipartisan support until the previous administration. And in addition to providing a durable solution to those in crisis, resettlement promotes regional stability and strengthens U.S. national security. The U.S. again demonstrated that humanitarian protection is an American value during the crisis in Afghanistan this fall. And the federal partners and resettlement agencies like LSSNCA around the country, with strong support from communities like ours, resettled 76,000 Afghans within 6 months, which was extraordinary as we were rebuilding the infrastructure that had been dismantled during the previous administration at the same time. And at LSSNCA, we resettled the largest number of Afghan allies on the East Coast, 4,500 individuals, with your support. And we continue to welcome them and other refugees arriving from around the globe. Next slide, please. Throughout our 100+ year history, LSSNCA has responded to the changing needs of our community. We are always on the front lines of the community response, like we are now, welcoming Ukrainians coming to our doors seeking asylum. We are currently helping more than 50 Ukrainians with emergency housing assistance funds, referrals for medical care, and other essential and time-sensitive basic needs and services. But we couldn't do this without you. You all have showed up in major ways and are still showing up as we welcomed Afghan allies this summer and fall. More than 2,000 of you showed up as volunteers, helping with transportation, English language practice, resume review, and grocery deliveries. You provided an overwhelming amount of in-kind donations, which went to furnish our new neighbors' first homes in the United States. You provided almost $200,000 in gift cards, which helped Afghan families purchase groceries, clothing, and other necessary items. And we grew our Good Neighbor Partner and Champion program with 130 more members who helped to set up new homes, pay rent, and ensure our new neighbors had new friends to reach out to in their new communities. Beyond the initial resettlement, we believe in creating belonging for those arriving to our community, and we do that with your help.
Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction, and thank you, Kristyn. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Before we dive into the topic of the day, I wanted just to take a few minutes to go over a plethora of terms that are being used to address many of the population that we are serving. And we will begin with the refugees. The 1951 Geneva Convention defined a refugee as someone who has a well-founded fear of persecution, and as a result of that fear is either unwilling or unable to return to their country of origin. There are today millions of people that fall into that definition. The special immigrant visa is a new terminology that started with the Iraq and then Afghanistan crises. These are folks that have served along with our military in Iraq and Afghanistan, and as a result of their involvement with our armed forces, are unable to stay in those countries. And those are the ones that are benefited from the special immigrant visa status. Asylum in the United States, for someone to be eligible for asylum, you must first meet the definition of a refugee as established by the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. The asylum is obtained either in the United States or at the port of entry. Humanitarian parole is for folks that are outside of the United States and will be admitted in the United States on a temporary basis up to 365 days, and that can be renewed as well. And once in the United States, they can then seek to adjust to other status in the United States and be able to stay in the United States. In the case of refugees, there are several examples. The special immigrant visa holders are just Afghan and Iraqis. Asylum, we have asylum from all over the world, from Cameroon, from Iraq, Afghanistan, many other parts of the world. Humanitarian parole, the most recent one that we have seen are the Afghans that were resettled in the United States during the month of August of 2021 onward. And then some of the Ukrainians that we have begun also to see, but also the large numbers that we expect to arrive in FY 2022 and beyond. The temporary protected status is a designation that the Secretary of Homeland Security assigned to some countries whose citizens are in the United States, but because of events in their countries cannot go back to those countries. It is a temporary status that grants them, if they were on removal proceedings, for the removal proceeding to be stopped, to be halted temporarily, and also it grants them the ability to be employed in the United States. The Unaccompanied Refugee Minor Program is a program that serves some of the most vulnerable minors in the world. These are children that were separated from their parents and are resettled in the United States without a parent and without a custodian. And in the United States, agencies like LSSNCA will establish for them those connections and families and the support that they need for them to thrive in the United States upon arrival. Next slide, please. As Kristyn mentioned earlier, although through the Uniting for Ukrainian, we expect thousands of Ukrainians to be resettled over the next several months, we have already begun to serve Ukrainians many years ago through a program that we called the Lautenberg program. So this is a family reunification program that allowed LSSNCA over the past decade to resettle hundreds of Ukrainians and help them be successful here in the United States. The ones that we have seen now and we have begun to serve, roughly around 50, Ukrainians that have crossed the southern border and that were granted the parolee status. So they are temporary in the United States. And in addition to those, we also expect other Ukrainians to be resettled through the Uniting for Ukraine. Next slide, please. So how are Ukrainians arriving in the United States or staying in the United States? Well, there are basically two pathways. One is for those that were already in the United States, either students or tourists that cannot go back to their country. They can seek through the TPS to stay in the United States. And then there are those that have been crossing through the southern borders, those that were granted the parolee status. And since the enactment of the United for Ukraine, now the pipeline for Ukrainians to be legally resettled in the United States is through that private sponsorship. So that means they have to have family members or individuals, citizens of the US or organization, file for them through the portal that was created by the USCIS, and that allows them to submit the application for sponsorship and then provide them with a pathway to be resettled in the United States. That will be a temporary status, and once in the United States, some of them might stay, some of them may return to their country of origin when the situation improves. Next slide.
Thank you, Mamadou. So Mamadou was sharing a bit about the Uniting for Ukraine program, and I'm showing this visual to compare the difference between Uniting for Ukraine and the traditional resettlement pathway through which we've received refugees for years. So the US Refugee Admissions Program, which has been around since 1980, we liken it to a three-legged stool. And we say that because all three legs of the stool are necessary for the stability of the program. So you'll see here that one leg is the State Department. The State Department's reception and placement funding provides initial funding for the first 3 months that a refugee arrives, and it allows resettlement agencies like LSSNCA to provide basic assistance and immediate needs to include housing. And the goal of that program is really self-sufficiency, and it's really aimed at ensuring refugees are employed within 3 months so that they're able to be self-sufficient. The next leg of the stool is the ORR funding and benefits. Those who are determined eligible as a refugee, which includes refugees and other populations, to include victims of human trafficking, to include people that receive asylum status, and the Afghans who arrived in the fall with parole status were also deemed eligible for ORR funding and benefits. That allows folks to be eligible for benefits such as refugee medical assistance, refugee cash assistance, TANF, and other benefits. And it also provides funding to resettlement agencies like ours to provide ongoing case management and employment assistance. So we have an employment training and placement program, and we work to help our clients find sustainable employment. And then the third leg, of course, is community support, and that includes all that you do. That includes everything that the people who have called in for this call do every day to ensure you are welcoming your new neighbors. It includes the work that you're doing through our Good Neighbor Partner and Champions program to help set up the initial home for a refugee family, to donate in-kind donations to help furnish their homes. It includes the monetary donations that you provide that help us extend rent payments until people are employed. It includes all of the ways that you show up as volunteers, as donors, to really wrap around your new neighbors. Next slide. So to speak a little bit more and expand upon what Mamadou mentioned earlier, Uniting for Ukraine allows for the immediate arrival of Ukrainians through this private sponsorship model and through humanitarian parole status. And so it allows those who arrive through this model to stay temporarily for up to 2 years. And those who are the sponsors must agree to provide financial support for the duration of their stay in the United States. From what we know from our work that we've done for decades with refugees, the average cost for a family of 3 to 4 is about $42,000 per year. And that, and plus out-of-pocket medical prescriptions and other essential needs. And so this includes things like rental assistance. So you can imagine that this program, requires sponsors to really be ready to make that financial commitment to sponsor Ukrainians who are arriving. Next slide. So now I'm going to go back to my stool analogy. So the previous stool that I shared, which was the traditional resettlement pathway, had the 3 legs. You see what happens when 2 of the legs are removed. It makes the stool unstable. And so in this model, the State Department is not involved in the resettlement. The Ukrainians are arriving through a Department of Homeland Security program. It's a sponsorship model. And so there isn't the same funding from the State Department for the reception and placement, that initial 3 months, or for the case management provided by the resettlement agencies. We did see that there's $1.2 billion in the Ukraine supplemental for the Office of Refugee Resettlement. We're hoping that that is also passed by the Senate, and that Ukrainians with humanitarian parole are then made eligible by an act of Congress for those ORR benefits. And if that were to happen, we would color in these dotted lines, and that would be a second stable leg of the stool. We did include that in dotted lines because although that seems likely that will happen, that's not the case for those who would be arriving right now. So those arriving right now would be arriving with humanitarian parole status, through which they're not eligible for things like refugee medical assistance or refugee cash assistance. And so that is, when we look at this community support leg, this is really relying on heavy community support, this model, to be able to wrap around arriving Ukrainians. Next slide. Mom, did you want to share a little bit about the benefits?
Yep, thank you. So what the chart shows you is really the difference between the refugee SIV and the humanitarian paroles. As you will see, all refugees have benefits funded through the Department of State that provide them with the core services for the first 90 days of their arrival in the United States. And it includes housing, transportation, case management, as well as some other benefits. And if they are enrolled in the matching grant program, which is funded through the Office of Refugee and Resettlement, they also would be able to access those benefits. And that program does also offer, in addition to some cash assistance, provide employment services. It's an early employment program. The employment services programs are either funded through the nationals or resettlement agencies or through the state. And the length of support may vary from 8 months to 5 years for those that are enrolled into the state-funded employment program. Through the employment program, we provide them with job search, job readiness, placement, evaluation of degrees, and job upgrade during that window of eligibility. Refugees also maybe are eligible for refugee cash assistance, and that cash assistance will vary from one state to the other, and depending on also the size of the family and the program they are enrolled in. And then the refugee medical assistance can cover their medical need for up to 8 months. And the refugees and the SIVs have a pathway to permanent status. Refugees 1 year upon arrival, SIVs within weeks of arriving in the United States, many of them get their green card. And it also confer the benefit of family reunification. That means upon arrival in the United States, they can apply for their loved ones to be reunited with them. And as you will notice, that refugees and SIVs have those benefits, while the humanitarian parolees do not have any of those benefits. So which makes the resettlement of humanitarian parolees much harder than what we see in the refugee part. And in the case of LSSNCA, when we first began resettling the Afghans, we had, in addition to mobilizing private funds, we also had to create a parallel staffing pattern to be able to serve them because of the funding restrictions that are put in place that would not allow our existing staff to be able to work with Afghans. Similarly to the Ukrainians, parolees, we do not currently have any funding to federal funding or state funding to serve them. And as a result, we need to make sure that there is a firewall between the staffing that we have in place for the other eligible population and the Ukrainians. So we have really to mobilize funds, mobilize community support, and be able to create staffing that would be able to help them and meet their needs as well.
Thank you, Mamadou. So next we'll be talking about how LSSNCA will be partnering with our community to support this model. Next slide. Last fall, when Afghans began to arrive via humanitarian parole, this community showed up with such a beautiful surge of compassion that we made national news. And we know what happens when we welcome together. And as you see in these pictures, this was just an everyday occurrence in our offices, where we were seeing truckloads of in-kind donations from all of you to help support our new neighbors. Next slide. So, this is a community that welcomes, this is a community that believes that we are stronger when we welcome refugees. And we are asking you to show up again in a strong surge of support with LSSNCA so that we're ready to go. As we've shared, there's still some uncertainty. We're still waiting to hear if Ukrainians will become eligible for ORR benefits. In a private sponsorship model, we're not able to predict how many Ukrainians will be coming to our area. It's really dependent on folks who are sponsoring to bring them here. And so, so we're not sure what to expect. And as Mamadou mentioned, because we don't have funding right now from the Department of State or Office of Refugee Resettlement to welcome arriving Ukrainians and help the sponsor with that placement, we are needing to fundraise on an unprecedented scale. We know that when people come to our community, when new neighbors come to our community, that they come to us. They know of our legacy in welcoming refugees and immigrants, and so they come to our doors. And we want to be able to welcome them when we do. We want to be able to provide them with services and with emergency assistance and really help them on their way. But to do that, we need donations. And so we have here a link to our Ukraine Relief Fund. Funds that come through that avenue will be used for us to develop an emergency assistance fund to provide direct funds to Ukrainians, and also to hire staff to really help sponsors and the arriving Ukrainians navigate community resources, get connected to any benefits for which they may become eligible if that happens, locate housing, cultural orientation, English language classes, all the services that we would like to be able to provide. Another way to help is to sign up to be the first to learn about how to welcome Ukrainian families with us. So as we are able to build the support to allow us to develop a program that can really help sponsors, we'll be contacting you to let you know that there's a sponsor in the area that could use some support. And then we can really wrap ourselves around that sponsor and the Ukrainian family to welcome them and to provide them with in-kind donations and other supports. Also, we need support in terms of pro bono legal services. You may have heard that the Afghan Adjustment Act, which many of us were advocating for, was not included in the Ukraine supplemental. Afghans who arrived via humanitarian parole currently don't have a pathway to permanent legal immigration status. And that's the same for the Ukrainians who will be arriving through humanitarian parole. It's not a status in itself, and it really leaves those arriving in legal limbo. They'll need to apply for asylum or other forms of immigration relief. And to do that, we need to amass really an army of pro bono attorneys who are willing to help us help them apply for these claims. So we, under our How to Help page on our website, we have more on how to sign up to be a pro bono attorney to work with us to help Afghans and Ukrainians apply for status. And then another area to provide support is if you're interested in being a foster parent. We are currently placing unaccompanied Afghan youth in foster homes, And we expect to receive referrals too for unaccompanied Ukrainian children. And this is another way that you can show up to support and provide a safe and loving home for children who are arriving without legal caregivers, legal guardians, or parents. Next slide. So at this point, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for all the ways that you've supported LSSNCA over the years. We couldn't do our work without all of you, and you are so important in these efforts. We are hoping that we can continue to rally again, to show up for arriving Ukrainians and others arriving from around the globe who are forcibly displaced. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Sarah to moderate the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Kristyn and Mamadou, for that information. We have lots of good questions. And Kristyn, the first one is for you. Do Uniting for Ukraine sponsors have to be family members? And how do you become a Uniting for Ukraine sponsor?
That's a great question. I'll ask my team to drop in the chat the link to the Department of Homeland Security page on all the requirements for becoming a sponsor for Ukrainians. You do not need to be a family member, but the requirements are all listed on the Department of Homeland Security website. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristyn. Mamadou, a couple questions for you about the Unaccompanied Refugee Minor Program. First of all, what does ORR stand for? And what happens to unaccompanied refugee minors when they turn 18?
Well, the ORR stands for Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. It is the agency that is in charge of domestic funding to resettlement agencies, but also to state and resettlement agencies, national resettlement agencies. All the domestic programs that you see, whether it is the matching grant or the state-funded employment program, the preferred community program, all of those are funded through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. The other question is the URM.
What happens to unaccompanied refugee minors when they turn 18?
Well, it depends on states. So in this area, they have to be in the program before they turn 18, and they emancipate when they turn 21. So during and when they turn 21, they can, some of them stay connected with what we call the independent livings. But when they are 18, in state like Commonwealth of Virginia, they may opt to be out of the program as well. So it's either they can stay until they emancipate at 21, or they can opt in to stay in the case of Virginia.
Thank you, Mamadou. Following up on that, have any unaccompanied minors from Ukraine arrived in the greater Washington area, and do we expect them to?
Not to the best of my knowledge. We have not received any at LSSNCA yet. Yes, we do expect that some of the Ukrainian minors might be resettled in the area.
Thank you.
And we always in need of foster care parents, foster care families. So we always recruiting and training licensing families to be ready for when we start to see those very vulnerable minors.
Following up on that, Kristyn, if someone is interested in fostering unaccompanied minors, can they start the process now? And what's the average processing time?
Yes, please do start the process now. We have information on our website on how to become a foster parent. We have orientations scheduled regularly. You would need to go through training with LSSNCA, and then some background checks and home visits, and really meeting the state requirements. And the process is really dependent on your ability to be able to produce the information that's needed for the background checks and the home visits, and also the availability of our team to the trainings. I know that we've been able to license families much more quickly in recent months, and that we've had a lot of collaboration from our state and federal partners on making sure that happens. Mamadou, I believe that it can be done as quickly as 3 months.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it's necessary and absolutely recommended that if you're interested to start the process now, it is very demanding. There is a lot of paperwork involved, a lot of training, a lot of licensing. So starting now the process will ensure that before you complete it, or before we start seeing the first a group of minors from Ukraine, you might be licensed and ready to welcome them.
Thank you, Kristyn. How will Ukrainian resettlement impact Afghan resettlement or resettlement of our Afghan allies?
We are continuing to welcome Afghans. So we've continued to serve Afghans arriving to our offices every day, and we are able to do both. We are able to welcome all who come to our door and ensure that they receive quality care and services. For the Afghans that are continuing to arrive, they are eligible for the ORR and the State Department funded services and benefits. And so in terms of the difference, right now, Afghans are eligible, as we mentioned, for public benefits. They're eligible for a full range of services that we're able to provide. And I think for the Ukrainians, we're still trying to build our capacity to try and somewhat mirror that program. We shared with you what the costs are, the average costs are for resettling a family. And so to do that completely through private funds is a challenge, but it's one that we know that this community can help us step up for. And we're really hopeful that Ukrainians will soon be eligible for public benefits.
Thank you, Kristyn. Mamadou, I have a 3-tiered question about the Ukrainian program. Why is the State Department not involved? Why aren't they arriving through traditional pathways? And why are they arriving without access to benefits? You're muted, Mamadou.
So maybe I'll start with the last one. So why they not? All humanitarian parolees that enter the United States are not eligible for benefits, unless there is an act of Congress. And as you remember with the Afghans, when they first arrived in August and September of last year, they were not eligible. But by October, the Congress passed the Afghan Supplemental Act that allowed all the Afghan parolees to be able to access the ORR benefits. So it is expected also that with the Ukrainian supplemental bill that has been passed by the House on Tuesday, that it will be passed by Senate, and when it does, they will be eligible for ORR benefits. So they will not be eligible for what we traditionally call the reception and placement, but that means they would be eligible for those benefits. And that would definitely help alleviate some of the challenges that we know are inherent to being a parolee in the United States. And the first portion of the question was?
Why are they not arriving through traditional pathways? And the question about why the State Department is not involved in this part.
Well, the parolee status is the fastest way to get someone in the United States. The fastest legal way to get someone in the United States. It is something that can be done within weeks, as we have seen with the Afghans and with the Ukrainians, whereas a traditional path to refugees can be very lengthy. So the processing overseas for refugees would be absolutely very lengthy, and it is just a parallel path that has been created here for the Ukrainians to be resettled in the United States in a much faster way than if they had to go through the refugee processing. And the involvement of the State Department is involved in the process, in fact, because although the applications are submitted through the USCIS, and every single person who is interested must file the I-134 and the financial declarations, the process overseas is really handled by the State Department. So it's really a partnership between the State Department and the USCIS, whereas the USCIS handles the portal and the processing overseas, the connection and the identification of those that will be eligible is really something that falls within the State Department.
Thank you, Mamadou. One more for you. What dictates where Ukrainians will be resettled in the United States?
Well, primarily it would be dictated by who filed for them and where that person is. So because the sponsor is legally bound to assist the person who they filed for. So if that person is in the DC area, very likely the person will be in the DC area. And that's why we want to encourage everyone who's interested in helping with the resettlement of the Ukrainians to file for them now, so that they can be settled in the DC area.
Thank you, Mamadou. Kristyn, we're interested in sponsoring a family, but do not have a specific Ukrainian family in mind. Can we be matched to a family in need?
That's a good question. I believe you can, and that would be something to fill out, I guess, on the Department of Homeland Security link that we included.
Thank you. Mamadou, how will the portal from Welcome US relate to services of the local agencies, and who identifies sponsors to take responsibility?
Well, the process itself is very simple. Any individual in the United States organization can file for someone, can complete a I-134. And the portal, the USCIS portal, provide all the details and all the process and all the documentation that need to be submitted. The Welcome US does not have a separate portal. So what they do is link up to the USCIS portal, which is actually the portal where all the application must be submitted.
Thank you. Mamadou, if Ukrainians arrived with a tourist visa, can they then apply in the US to adjust their status?
Well, good question. If they were in the United States before the events, then they could be eligible for the TPS, the temporary protected status. And that would allow them, for at least that designation would allow them to be legally in the state, to stay legally in the United States for up to 18 months. And that would allow them also to get an employment authorization document and be able to get employed in the United States. So that would be students, tourists, anyone who was in the United States, and as a result would be eligible to apply for the TPS.
Thank you, Mamadou. Kristyn, for planning purposes, do you have any idea of how many Ukrainians might come to this area?
It's a really good question. I think the best way to think about it is, if Uniting for Ukraine committed to bringing in 100,000 Ukrainians, and through the Welcome Afghan allies, the US brought in 76,000 Afghans. So we're expecting to bring in significantly more Ukrainians. And although the DC metro area is not a primary destination site for Ukrainians like it was for the Afghans, this is still a significant metropolitan area. So I don't know, because it's really dependent on where the private sponsors are who are participating. And so it's kind of like looking in a crystal ball. I will say that LSSNCA resettled about 5%, a little more than 5% of the 76,000 Afghans. We know, however, that in that scenario, that the DC metro area was certainly one of the highest areas. So even if we served less than 5%, even if we were to serve 1%, that would still be 1% of 100,000, still 1,000 people. But short answer is no, and I don't think any of us know that, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And even if they are sponsored in other part of the country, they can still out-migrate. So they can move from other state to this area and still be able to, and still need some assistance as well. So but the primary indicator of how many people will be resettled in the area would be how many sponsors are coming forward and filing for Ukrainians in the area. So that would be the primary indicator.
Thank you. Mamadou, what happens if a Ukrainian refugee coming through humanitarian parole does not receive a sponsor? Will they be in limbo, and who can help them?
Well, since the United for Ukraine have been United for Ukraine has been launched, the administration has discouraged anyone to try to get to the United States in any other way, crossing the southern border, for instance. So the only legal path for the Ukrainian to be in the United States is through that portal. So a sponsorship program to resettle them. The other pathway would be for those that relatives have filed the Lautenberg program, which is a family reunification program that has been in place for many, many years. So for those that had already filed for their loved ones through the Lautenberg program or currently come forward and file for their relatives, yes, that would be another pipeline for them to be resettled in the United States.
Kristyn, people want to work with LSSNCA in their Ukrainian work. What's the best way for them to do this?
Please do come work with us. We have 39 positions available as of today. They are in all of our programs. They're in our refugee and immigration programs, which we're speaking about right now. And those programs include the resettlement program, our employment program. It includes our program that serves asylum seekers, providing them with vital mental health services. We also have youth and unaccompanied refugee minor programs. And we have a program in Washington, D.C. and Virginia. And for that program, we're looking for social workers. And then we have a youth development and wellness program that works with young people in DC, providing mentoring and support and education on healthy relationships. And then we also have open positions in our administrative office. So we have open positions in finance and human resources and development. And I'll have my team drop into the chat our career page on our website. We do, I believe, Sarah, have a case manager position posted for Ukrainian speaking case manager and a community engagement specialist or coordinator. And as we are able to raise funds to support a more robust response, you can continue to check our website and see additional case management and community engagement positions related to the Ukraine response. But I think Mamadou here is a testament to the wanting to work at LSS. Mamadou's been on our team for almost 18 years, if not 18 years now. I think it's a really fulfilling place to work. And it's a really exciting time to join our team. We've grown in the past year. We went from about 55 people on our team at the beginning of 2021. Today, we have about 130 people on our team. And we are all about creating more welcoming communities, advancing justice for refugees and others who are forced to leave their homes, and protecting and helping unaccompanied children and other young people thrive. So please do join our team.
Mamadou, do you know how we connect with Ukrainians that would like to come to the United States and how long that process might take?
It's not very clear to me how that connection would happen overseas. So it's still not that very clear. Once a sponsorship application has been submitted and vetted by the USCIS, USCIS would very likely work very closely with the State Department to match it with someone overseas and then arrange for the travel for that person to be in the United States. But I'm not really into the process once the application is submitted.
Thank you. Kristyn, we have people who volunteered and donated for the Afghan allies, and they would like to do that again for our Ukrainians. How do we sign up again? Do we need to sign up again?
Thank you so much. We're so grateful for your volunteer time and for your donations. I'll have my team put in the chat or in the Q&A, I guess, the link to our Ukraine Relief Fund, which is on our website. And then we also have an interest form on our Welcome Ukrainians page. And in that interest form, we're seeking folks who want to help support a sponsoring a Ukrainian family. And again, we're still trying to figure out exactly what that looks like, but we do expect Ukrainians to be coming to the area. We expect them to be coming with sponsors, and we expect them to need our help. We know that the sponsors are committing to that sponsorship and to that financial sponsorship, but we also know, and you all know from your response in the fall to the Afghan crisis, that even when there's a committed community wrapping around and when there are federally funded benefits and services, there's still a lot of needs. And so we want to be there to fill in those gaps, and we need you to do that, to help us do that. We need your support and we need your help. And so please do fill out the interest form. Please also donate to our Ukraine Relief Fund, and please pass that along. Thank you so much for your support.
Thanks, Kristyn. Mamadou, can a Ukrainian parolee also invoke the Lautenberg Amendment to bring the rest of their family?
When they arrive as a parolee, yes, there is a possibility that they can file for Lautenberg program for the loved ones.
Thank you. Kristyn, where in the area does LSSNCA provide services and support?
Our offices that serve refugees, that provide refugee resettlement services, are in Greenbelt, Maryland, in Fairfax, Virginia, and in Woodbridge, Virginia. We also have an unaccompanied refugee minor program in our Fairfax, Virginia office and our Washington, D.C. office.
Thank you. Kristyn, what kind of services are we already providing to Ukrainians?
So right now, we are serving Ukrainians who arrived from the southern border seeking asylum. We've been serving about 50. We've served about 50 since March, and we're really providing emergency assistance. So emergency assistance for housing and for basic needs. And then we also provide services to those arriving through the Lautenberg Amendment, and that's a program that we've had for quite a while. And for those families, we're able to provide more comprehensive resettlement services.
Thank you. I think we're going to wait for a minute while we get some more questions through the chat.
This is such an engaged group. Thank you so much for your great questions, and we're so happy that you are with us this evening. So thanks for joining.
Mamadou, we have a question that is about humanitarian parole. Is it true that one had to have had a sponsor to be admitted into the United States?
For the humanitarian parolees, that's not my understanding of the program. Yeah.
Mamadou, we have a question about if humanitarian parolees will be authorized to work and expected to work in the United States.
Yes, so they will be granted an EAD, employment authorization document, and they will be eligible for employment in the United States. And if the Ukrainian supplemental bill passes, that also means that they will be able to be served through LSSNCA ORR funded programs.
Thank you. Kristyn, can someone who has humanitarian parole walk into an LSSNCA office for services?
That's a great question. Yes, but they are absolutely, they can walk in. I think right now there's uncertainty of what services we're able to provide. But yes, we are looking, and that's why we're having this call. We need your support to help us raise the resources that we need to be able to have a strong staffing response to respond to this crisis. You may remember we were on a call like this with all of you last summer when we began serving Afghans arriving. And similarly, we said, yes, we want to serve everyone that comes to our doors. We don't want to turn anyone away. And at that time that we began serving Afghans, they were not eligible for ORR benefits and services. And so with your support, we were able to hire some staff to be able to respond to those cases. because our current staff all have full caseloads responding to other arriving refugee cases. So yes, we can provide support, but we really need more support to be able to staff up and hire the staff that we need so that we can respond, and we can respond well.
And we do not, as Kristyn said, we do not want the immigration status of Ukrainians arriving now to be a hindrance to them getting access to the services that they need. Although we cannot connect them to the federally funded programs, we want to ensure that their needs are being met. And that's why we need the community support to have the private funds that we can use to pay for their housing, to pay for their food, to help them with their health needs while we wait for any potential funding from the federal government or from the state.
Thank you. Kristyn, back to unaccompanied refugee minors. What region does the unaccompanied refugee minor program serve, and where do you have to live in order to foster?
We have a program in Fairfax, Virginia, and one in Washington, D.C. And for the program in Washington, D.C., we are able to also place youth with foster parents in Maryland, in the suburbs that are accessible and close to D.C. We also, sorry, I lost track. What was the other part of the question?
Where do you have to live in order to be a foster parent?
Oh, okay. So Washington, D.C., suburban Maryland, but that's accessible to D.C., and then the surrounding areas of Fairfax, Virginia. Mamadou, what's the radius in which we place outside of
50-mile radius.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mamadou, back to Ukrainian resettlement, where do you think will be the primary geographic areas for arriving Ukrainians to the U.S.? I know we touched upon it earlier, but.
In the U.S., it is expected that historically, the vast majority of Ukrainians have been resettled in Seattle, Washington, and Oregon. So it is expected that that trend will continue, but no one single community is able to resettle 100,000 Ukrainians. So for that reason, we expect that they will be placed in many communities and will be resettled in many communities. And that's why we also project that the DC area may see a high number of Ukrainians, both in Virginia, Maryland, and the DC area.
Thank you. Kristyn, what other local organizations does LSSNCA work with?
So LSSNCA really believes in collaboration, and in the response to Afghan allies, we were really able to build a really strong coalition of community organizations and volunteers and multi-faith coalitions to help in our response. And so that would include the local government funded agencies. It would include veteran-led organizations, Afghan-led organizations, different faith groups. We work really we work alongside the Lutheran congregations, for example, but we also have really amassed a very broad level of support across all faith groups. We have support, and we work alongside the Jewish Federation, the Afghan-led groups, Muslim-led groups. So, we believe in the power of collaboration. We believe in creating strong communities, and to do that, we want to work with you. We need to work with a broad array of organizations to help meet the needs of those we serve and to help fill in gaps of expertise that we may not have. We want to ensure that the services we provide are culturally appropriate and that we're able to really plug into those trusted communities that those we serve are trusted in their local communities. And for this response, we're also looking to build our relationships with Ukrainian-led community groups and Ukrainian congregations that are primarily Ukrainian. So if you are a member of one of those groups, or if you know members of those groups, please do connect with us. We would love to work with you. And there are many ways that we do that. We do that through our GNP partner program. We do that through more formal relationships and MOUs. We do that through referral sources. We do that by co-hosting events like job fairs, coat drives and clothing drives. We know we can't do this alone and that it takes a community, and we want to partner with you.
Thank you, Kristyn. We have 2 more questions before we wrap up for the night, and both are for you, Kristyn. You mentioned the need for legal services earlier. Can you touch on the needs of LSSNCA and those you're working with again in terms of the legal services?
Absolutely. And Sarah, I might ask for your help with this. So let me tell you about the need first. So as we mentioned earlier, we welcomed 4,500 Afghans over the past 9 or so months. And the majority of the Afghans we welcomed arrived with humanitarian parole status. Humanitarian parole status does not confer permanent immigration status. There's no legal pathway. And there's a requirement to apply for asylum within your first year. Well, we all remember vividly that many arrived in August. I think many of us have that day etched in our minds when we were watching everything unfold on the TV. And so August is quickly approaching, and we're in May. And so we need to have attorneys helping our clients apply for asylum before that deadline of August, so that they're not at risk of deportation, so they're not in legal limbo. Likewise, the 100,000 Ukrainians we're expecting nationwide will also be arriving via humanitarian parole. So we're not sure yet how many will be coming to the DC metro area, but all of them will also need attorneys to help them apply for permanent immigration relief. Sarah, do you want to share more about opportunities through our upcoming legal clinics?
Sure. So as Kristyn mentioned, we're working to help many of our Afghan allies reach a pathway to permanency. What LSS is doing is multiple initiatives. So we're hosting large-scale pro se asylum workshops. So we need volunteers, not necessarily legally trained, but that can help with our clients as they detail their asylum applications and their narratives. And we can also, we have a sign-up genius that we can also send out if people are interested in participating in those workshops. Additionally, we need law students, any pro bono attorneys that are willing to provide support after the workshops to make sure that we file within that 1-year deadline, and lawyers that are interested in working with more complicated cases. So while we're pleased with our efforts to host the pro se asylum workshops, we know that that's just the beginning, and we need more attorneys, more law students, more volunteers who are willing to support all of the humanitarian parolees as they walk through the rather complicated asylum process. And I think we have some links on our website as well if you're interested in offering that support. All right, the last question for the night, Kristyn. Do you prefer at this time in-kind donations or monetary donations?
Right now, we prefer monetary donations that will help us build the support that we need internally and to be able to respond. I will also add that, and I know we've said this in the past and it hasn't happened yet, but we do have a list of warehouse spaces from our real estate agent that we're looking at. We saw in this past 9 months or so how giving this community is and providing in-kind donations. And we saw the looks on the faces of those we're serving when they were able to receive these brand new items to furnish their new homes. And we want to do more of that. And we want you to be able to do that with us. But many of you also saw our offices and saw that we had no place to store things and that we were sitting in tiny cubes underneath tunnels of in-kind donations, and that we had them pouring out of our offices and into our parking lots, and we were taking every spare space available. Many of you donated spaces. People donated their garages and their churches, and so we realized we need a warehouse. And so we're working on that. We don't have one right now. When we do, we will let you know, and that will allow us to ramp up the in-kind donations at a larger scale. Right now, please do provide in-kind donations through our Amazon wish list. We do have some capacity to take limited in-kind donations, but monetary donations would be also very welcome and would really help us with the staffing support that we need to be able to provide the services and support that we know that these families will need. We know that people are fleeing active trauma. And we know that although they have caring sponsors that have committed to taking care of them, that there's still going to be a lot of needs, and it takes all of us, and it takes a community. And we know that people are going to come to our doors, and I think you saw this from us in the fall. We didn't turn anyone away, and so those monetary donations will really go a long way, and we appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kristyn. We're so grateful for you having been here with us tonight. Thank you, Mamadou and Kristyn. We want to remind everyone that while we're focusing on Ukrainians and Afghan allies, that LSSNCA continues to welcome refugees from around the world, Syria, Congo, Eritrea, and so our work continues, El Salvador. And so if you're interested in supporting any of those other groups as well, please do get involved. There will be a recording of this presentation available on Monday, and we've dropped many links into the chat. So again, thank you so much for coming out tonight, and thank you to Mamadou and Kristyn for being here.